Good evening and welcome to the reorganization of the Bridgewater-Raritan Regional Board of Education. In compliance with the Open Public Meetings Law of New Jersey, notice of this January 5th, 2021 meeting of the Bridgewater-Raritan Regional Board of Education was posted electronically on the district website and provided on December 29th, 2020 by sending a 48-hour written notice to the Courier News, Star Ledger, Bridgewater Township Clerk, Raritan Borough Clerk, and by posting on the bulletin board in the Harmon V. Wade Administration Building. As this is a virtual meeting, those unable to access the meeting via the internet are able to listen in by dialing into the conference line number 712-432-6514 and conference pin number 555548. Please rise for the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. At this time, I will flash on the screen the three certificates for the election before I go ahead and read them and combine them. There is one. Let me see if I can get the others. Let me get a tab. There's another one, and I will be reading these momentarily. And okay. So I will save you the torture of me reading them all individually, and I will read one of them and combine the other two. Election statement for municipal offices, general election, November 3rd, 2020. A statement of the determination of the Board of Canvassers of Somerset County, New Jersey, relative to an election held in the County of Somerset on November 3rd, 2020, for the election of the following mentioned offices in the Township of Bridgewater. 2 3-year Bridgewater-Raritan Regional Board of Education seats. The said board does determine that Barry R. Walker and Jessica Levitt were duly elected to Bridgewater-Raritan Regional Board of Education. 1-year Bridgewater-Raritan Regional Board of Education unexpired term seat. The said board does determine that Ching Chown Jean Lee was duly elected to Bridgewater-Raritan Regional Board of Education. For the election of the following mentioned offices in the Borough of Raritan. 1 3-year Bridgewater-Raritan Regional Board of Education seat. The said board does determine that Lucretia Lucy Sandler was duly elected to Bridgewater-Raritan Regional Board of Education. I do hereby certify that the foregoing is a true, full, and correct statement of the determination of the Board of Canvassers of Somerset County, New Jersey, in witness whereof I have hereunto set my hand this 23rd day of November 2020. Anthony J. DeSico, Chairman, County Board of Canvassers, attested to by Steve Peter, Somerset County Clerk. With that, I would ask that those new recently elected 4 individuals stand and raise your right hand and repeat after me. I state your name.
I, Barry Walker,
I, Jean Lee,
Do solemnly swear or affirm
Do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of New Jersey,
that I will
that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of New Jersey,
and that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same
and that I will bear
and I will bear the faith and allegiance to the same,
and to the governments established in the United States and this state,
and to the
and
government
to the government established in the United States and this state,
under the authority of the people, so help me God.
under the
under
authority
the authority of the people, so help me.
I state your name,
I, Barry
I,
Walker,
Delegate,
do solemnly swear or affirm
do solemnly
do
swear
solemnly swear or affirm
that I possess the qualifications prescribed by law for the office of member of a Board of Education,
that I
that
possess
I possess the qualifications prescribed by law for the office of member of a Board of Education,
am not disqualified as a voter pursuant to registered statute 19:4.1,
am
I
not
am
disqualified as a
qualified
voter
as a voter pursuant to RS 19:4.1,
am not disqualified due to conviction of a crime or offense listed in New Jersey statutes annotated 18A:12-1,
am
and
not
not disqualified due to conviction of a crime of offense listed in NJSA
Jersey
18A:12-1,
18A:12-1,
and that I will faithfully, impartially, and justly perform all the duties of that office according to the best of my ability, so help me God.
and that I will
and that I will
faithfully,
faithfully,
impartially,
impartially, and
justly perform all the
perform
duties
all the
of
duties of
according to
office
the best
according
of
to the best of my abilities, so help me God.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And if you would, at a later date, submit those oath of offices signed to me, please. This brings us to the next agenda item, which is the election of a president. Do I have any nominations?
I would like to nominate Mrs. Barlow.
I'd like to second that nomination.
Are there any other
Close
nominations? I'm sorry, Barry.
Motion to close nominations.
Second.
With no other nominations, I will close the floor. And at this time, we will take a vote for Mrs. Barlow as president. Ms. Sandler,
Yes.
Mr. Joshi,
Yes.
Mr. Singer,
Yes.
Mr. Walker,
Yes.
Ms. Lee,
Yes,
Ms. Hurley,
Yes.
Ms. Levitt,
yes,
Mrs. Gladstone,
Yes.
Mrs. Barlow.
Yes.
Congratulations, Mrs. Barlow. The imaginary gavel is yours.
And thank you very much, everyone, for your support and vote of confidence. Okay, so we are now up to the election of a vice president. Are there any motions?
I move to nominate Barry Walker.
Second.
I was going to nominate Mrs. Gladstone. No second.
Do we want to have a discussion about it?
I would second. Is it too late to?
No.
No, it isn't. And actually, I actually pulled out the bylaws right before this meeting. I had to run because I forgot them on the printer. And I don't even think you need a second.
I think you're right. Yeah.
So, which I didn't, I'm glad I had printed it. So I guess at this point, I would suggest if there's any discussion we want to have right now.
Hi, can I speak?
Yes, absolutely.
I appreciate the nomination, the second, and I really did enjoy being vice president under Jackie. And but I feel after so many years in leadership right now that it would be a nice opportunity for someone else who showed interest. So I don't know if I refuse the nomination or what the policy, what the procedure is, or I don't know how we go about.
You're able to decline it. if you don't want to be nominated, you're able to decline it. I'll say the reason that I nominated you, I feel with everything that going on and things changing every day, I think consistency is very important. I think you know the role of the vice president, and that's also very important. So that was my intention in your nomination, particularly because of consistency. I didn't realize that Barry had expressed an interest in it. Barry, I guess I'd like to know how you see that role, if that would be helpful. Unless Jill is just going to decline and Barry's the only nominee.
I mean, the role of the vice president is supporting in the same role as, any board member. I mean, you're in no different position than any other board member, as is the president. You have the same vote. And it is good to have consistency, but it's also having the experience too. So it's not like I haven't been the ability, and I've been trying to do my best in those areas. So, I mean, and leadership is important, and sometimes it's good to both train and to develop. You've got a good leader in Jackie, and working together. So I feel comfortable in the role. It's not, you're more of a backup than you are a primary, and it's also learning. So 6 years, it's been a decent training on the board. And had a lot of information, try to work well with everyone I can and listen. That's part of the listening and learning.
Well, as I said, I appreciate the support, and from Lynn very much, and Lucy. But I'm going to decline, and maybe another time in the future. So thank you so much.
Any other nominations, or are we ready to close? Okay, roll call, please.
Ms. Sandler,
Yes.
Mr. Joshi,
Yes.
Mr. Singer,
Yes.
Mr. Walker,
Yes.
Ms. Lee,
Yes.
Mrs. Hurley,
Yes.
Ms. Levitt,
Yes.
Ms. Gladstone,
Yes.
Mrs. Barlow.
Yes. Motion carries, and welcome to the position, Barry,
Thank you.
and looking forward to working together. Next, we're up to item 5F, the reading of the Code of Ethics, and what we have historically done. I'm sorry, did someone say something? What we've historically done is each take a turn with reading an item on the Code of Ethics. And Peter, if we could go in roll call order, maybe that way we'll know who's going, if you could just mention each name after, before each item.
Okay. First is Ms. Sandler.
I will uphold and enforce all laws, rules, and regulations of the State Board of Education and court orders pertaining to schools. Desired changes shall be brought about only through legal and ethical procedures.
Mr. Joshi.
I will make decisions in terms of the educational welfare of children and will seek to develop and maintain public schools that meet the individual needs of children regardless of their ability, race, creed, sex, or social standing.
Mr. Singer.
I will confine my board action to policymaking, planning, and appraisal, and will help to frame policies and plans only after the board has consulted those who will be affected by them.
Mr. Walker.
I will carry out my responsibilities not to administer the schools, but to, together with my fellow board members, to see that they are well run.
Ms. Lee.
I will recognize that authority rests with the Board of Education and will make no personal promises nor take any private action that may compromise the board.
Mrs. Hurley.
I will refuse to surrender my independent judgment to special interest or partisan political groups or to use the schools for personal gain or for the gain of friends.
Ms. Levitt,
I will hold confidential all matters pertaining to the schools, which, if disclosed, would needlessly injure individuals or the schools. In all other matters, I will provide accurate information and, in concert with my fellow board members, interpret to the staff the aspirations of the community for its school.
Ms. Gladstone,
You're on mute.
All right, I'm sorry. I had a little computer problem and I'm just getting back to that. Can you just,
number
I
8.
lost- what's that? No,
Number
I need to find the sheet. Hold on one second. In the bylaws, I'm sorry. Come back to me one second.
I think I'm next, Peter.
Yes.
I will vote to appoint the best qualified personnel available after consideration of the recommendation of the Chief Administrative Officer.
Ms. Gladstone, are you ready, or do you want me to pass one more?
No, hang on a second. Okay. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. I will support and protect school personnel in proper performance of their duties.
And back to Ms. Sandler. You can read the last one, please.
Sure. I will refer all complaints to the Chief Administrative Officer and will act on the complaints at public meetings only after failure of an administrative solution.
Okay, so we are all set with the Code of Ethics. And next we're up to item G, which is election of a representative and alternate to the Somerset County Educational Services Commission Board of Directors. So is there a motion to nominate someone? Or if there's someone that's interested?
I nominate Barry Walker.
Second.
Yeah, I kind of like to continue. It's been a really good experience. It's good to have some continuity on that board. So thank you.
Absolutely. Anyone else for nominations? Okay, roll call, please.
Ms. Sandler,
Yes.
Mr. Joshi,
Yes.
Mr. Singer,
Yes.
Mr. Walker,
Yes.
Ms. Lee,
Yes.
Mrs. Hurley,
Yes.
Mr. Levitt,
Yes,
Mrs. Levitt, excuse me.
I said yes, sorry.
I'm sorry. Mrs. Gladstone,
Yes.
Mrs. Barlow.
Yes, motion carries. Next, we're up to the election of a I'm sorry, actually, we need an alternate as well to the Somerset County Educational Services. Is there someone that would like to be the alternate?
It is a daytime meeting, 4:30 on Wednesdays, every other month. Just a little
Can't do that.
update. So
If we need an alternate, I can do that. Oh, Jill, you would like?
I'll be the alternate, knowing that Barry is very much in attendance. No, just kidding. I'll be happy to be the alternate.
Okay, great. And I guess we probably need to vote on that as well, Peter, or no?
Sure.
A roll call, please.
Ms. Sandler,
Yes.
Mr. Joshi,
Yes.
Mr. Singer,
Yes.
Ms. Lee,
Yes.
Mrs. Hurley,
Yes.
Ms. Levitt,
Yes,
Mrs. Gladstone,
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Walker,
yes.
Mrs. Barlow.
Yes, motion carries. Next, we're up to election of a delegate to the New Jersey School Board Association, Delegates Assembly, and Somerset County School Boards Association. Is there a
It's
nomination?
the same person always. Is it always the same person, Jackie?
I
Usually,
don't
right?
recall.
It can be both. It can be. We've had separate
I think it's
before. We
usually
have
been
both.
separate.
So yeah.
Okay, so would we like to separate these, or I guess
Well,
do we
not
have-
with the same person. I don't have a problem with it. I was just asking.
Okay,
I know it's hard for people to get to the meeting, so we may not have.
Well,
that
they've actually
many.
been virtual. The last two have been virtual, so probably the next one will be too.
But when they're not virtual, are they during the day?
No, Somerset County School Board Association usually is on a Wednesday night. It's at
That's at
6:30.
night.
And
But
then
the
Delegate
Delegate
Assembly
Assembly
is
is
on
on
a
the weekend.
Saturday in March and November, I think, or May and November. I can't remember which days. Sorry.
do we have anyone interested?
Was
Okay.
it you, Barry, last year, or?
I did it last year. I actually I can attend for multiple boards because I'm Somerset County president for that, so I can do it. You know, I'm going to be attending anyways, so that's great.
Okay, I nominate Mr. Walker.
Okay, is there a second?
Second?
Yep.
Okay,
Second.
roll call, please.
Ms. Sandler,
Yes.
Mr. Joshi,
Yes.
Mr. Singer,
Yes.
Ms. Lee,
Yes.
Mrs. Hurley,
Yes.
Ms. Levitt,
Yes.
Mrs. Gladstone,
Yes.
Mr. Walker,
Yes.
Mrs. Barlow.
Yes, motion carries. Next, we're up to the appointment of town representatives. I'm assuming for Raritan, that would be Ms. Sandler. Okay, and how about for Bridgewater?
I'm happy to
I
continue.
nominate Mr. Singer.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second?
I think
Oh.
it's an appointment anyway. I don't think there needs to be a nomination.
Okay. It actually does say appointment, but we'll go ahead and make sure. Is anyone else interested?
No.
Okay, roll call, please. And I know it's an appointment, but let's just go through the formality.
Ms. Sandler,
Yes.
Mr. Joshi,
Yes.
Mr. Singer,
Yes, thank you.
Ms. Lee,
Yes.
Mrs. Hurley,
Yes.
Mrs. Levitt,
Yes.
Mrs. Gladstone,
Yes.
Mr. Walker,
Yes.
Mrs. Barlow.
Yes, motion carries. Next, we're up to the first opportunity for public comment. Okay. Individuals and/or groups are invited to present their concerns, comments, and requests to the Board of Education at this time for only matters being acted upon. In accordance with board policy, members of the public are allotted this opportunity to address the board for a maximum of actually, I'm going to break here for a second. Dr. Fakera, do we want to go with 5 or 3 minutes tonight? I'm going to recommend, because I think there may be a lot of people wanting to comment, that we're going to go with 3 minutes.
And I think
Did
that
we
we
change
changed
our policy to 3 anyway?
Yes, we changed the policy to 3 minutes when we went a few weeks ago, since we were in virtual, and yeah. That's what we did.
Okay, it just had it in parentheses here, so I apologize,
So,
everyone.
If I remember correctly, the policy said 3 minutes and then for a period of a half an hour.
Okay. So we may want to just update this to reflect that going forward. So, so they have the board. You have the opportunity to address the board for a maximum of 3 minutes, up to 30 minutes total during this period of the meeting. As this meeting is being conducted remotely as a virtual meeting, public comments can be made via the following options. 1, completing the form online, which will be read at the appropriate point in the meeting. 2, leaving a voicemail at 908-725-3976. Or 3, email or letter received by the board secretary prior to 6 p.m. indicating the person's desire for the email to be read as public comment. Mr. Stars, do we have any comments?
We have comments, but they don't actually currently pertain to the action items. So they would be held off to the second section.
Okay, thank you. So we'll close that section of public comment. And we are now up to the reorganization motions for number 7. And for items A through, give me 1 second here. So items A through K. Is there a motion?
So moved.
So moved.
Second.
And a second?
Second.
Okay. Any discussion?
I think I had a question. I'm sorry, I lost my place on here. Just bear with me 1 second.
Sure.
Anyone else have anything while I'm looking for my note?
Jackie, we added the meeting on January 28th.
Yes, we added actually 2 meetings. We have 2 special meetings. I think one is the January 28th, and I think one is April 22nd, if I recall correctly.
The 22nd.
22nd, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
22nd.
And so those were the special meetings that we want New Jersey school boards to come in to talk to us about roles and responsibilities, as well as sensitivity around implicit bias topics along that line.
Okay. Thanks.
Anyone else while Lynn is looking?
Okay. I had something on K. So I
Okay.
just wanted to clarify on the hourly for David Rubin. He's also part of Bush Law. So I just wanted to clarify because Bush Law rate is different than David Rubin's rate. And my understanding was that we were paying Mr. Rubin only for the old cases, the higher rate, and any new cases would come under Bush Law. And I just want to make sure that I'm understanding this correctly.
I don't believe that to be the case. We had a existing agreement with Mr. Rubin prior to as special counsel. So he does, he has existing clients that he's always dealt with under his law firm. So this is, we've been dealing with him as special education under his own law firm. He's of counsel, I believe, with Bush Law Group, but we don't necessarily do work with him under that umbrella.
So then I was mistaken because my thought was that once he joined Bush Law, the existing cases would be under the David Rubin's firm's rate, but any new special ed cases would go under the Bush Law rate. But you're saying anything handled by David, even though he's with Bush Law, will be at that higher rate.
Yes.
Okay.
Do we need to verify, or it sounds like you're pretty certain about it?
Yeah, no, we get a separate bill from Rubin Law, as opposed to we don't get billed from him under Bush Law Group.
Okay. And I actually had one. Lynn, did you have anything else on that?
No, that was it, Jackie. Thank you.
Okay. I actually had a question in terms of, I know like under Bush Law, there's paralegal, there's a reduced rate like for certain activities, but I don't see that with Mr. Rubin or with Ms. Mikado. Is it appropriate that maybe they have a reduced rate for certain activities or no?
Rare is the time that we get billed for anybody other than the principals that at that rate.
Okay. So even with Bush Law, we tend to get the principal rate. Okay.
Correct.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Okay, roll call, please.
Ms. Sandler,
Yes.
Mr. Joshi,
Yes.
Mr. Singer,
Sorry, yes.
Ms. Lee,
Yes.
Mrs. Hurley,
Yes.
Ms. Levitt,
Yes.
Mrs. Gladstone,
Yes.
Mr. Walker,
Yes.
Mrs. Barlow.
Yes, motion carries. Next, we're going to let Dr. Ficara give a talk to everyone and hopefully to help address. I know there's been a lot of questions from the community. Dr. Ficara?
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. As we begin the new calendar year and halfway through the new school year, I thought it would be appropriate to just give an overview of where we are and what we've been doing to prepare for the future and where we've been this year. So as you know, since October, we've been operating on a hybrid schedule with ranging somewhere between 46 and 50 something % of our student body choosing to go all remote. The remainder of the students are on a hybrid schedule. So students in K through 8 are on an AB schedule, and the high school are on an ABC schedule. Since October, we had to close the high school for 14 days on 3 separate occasions. The middle school was closed once for 14 days, and the elementary schools have not been closed due to the pandemic since we opened for hybrid instruction on October 12th. Since October 12th, we've been asked to accumulate numbers for the staff, for the state, and we report those numbers out. And since October 12th, we've identified 149 individuals who've tested positive. And through the contact tracing that goes along with that, meaning when someone is tested positive, we question them to find out who they were in close contact with. And we've identified and quarantined an additional 451 people. So recently, there have been a number of questions from the community relative to how these decisions are made and what are the plans for the future. And I thought it would be appropriate that we go through just how we make these decisions because they are complex and the public does deserve a right to know. And I think it's an appropriate time to take a step back and give us an overview. But it's important to note that while the final decisions to open schools, close schools, to make a schedule change is made by the superintendent, me, I have made any and all decisions regarding the opening and the scheduling of our schools based upon the NJDOE Road Back Restart Recovery Plan for opening schools, the New Jersey Department of Health and the CDC guidelines, and also in close collaboration with our local and county health officials. It's important for the public to understand that the administrative decisions made were not and will not going forward be based on politics or popular opinions surrounding the pandemic. We are strictly adhering to the guidelines provided to us by the state of New Jersey and the advice given to us through our local and county health officials. So there have been a number of interesting and quite appropriate questions that have been asked about the intricacies of some of the things that have taken place. And I wanted to take you through what staff and I developed some FAQs putting together from emails and just conversations we've had with staff, parents, et cetera. So Andre, could you put the slide presentation forward? Thank you. So we broke this down to a couple of areas, health and safety. Next slide, please. This is a matrix that's developed by the Department of Health, New Jersey Department of Health, given to the local health departments to share with us through the county and through the county superintendent. And this is a matrix that shows us, that gives us, the state declares what level of risk we are at, and then we are asked to act appropriately according to these guidelines. So two things that I want to point out. The moderate risk level, which is where we started out, recommends that you consider a mixture of remote and hybrid learning approaches and all full remote learning. And as you know, we chose to go with a hybrid learning experience. During that time, if anyone was identified as having tested positive to COVID-19, we were instructed that we had to identify that person and identify their close contacts and exclude their close contacts, quarantine their close contacts for a period of time. It was 14 days. It's been switching to 10 days in certain cases. But that was the guidance. The next level up, when the COVID rate increases, their recommendation is to consider going fully remote. But if schools are to remain open in person, we now have a new criteria, which we have to treat not only the positive tested people with a contact tracing element, where we identify who they were with for certain periods of time, and then quarantine those individuals. We now, because the risk was considered much higher, anyone exhibiting symptoms had to be treated as a positive, not listed as a positive on our COVID count, but treated as positive, meaning they had to be quarantined. But not only them, they had to be anyone they came in contact with that we were able to identify also had to be quarantined for 14 days. Now that quarantine, so the difference between moderate and high, and moderate, if you tested positive, then you and everyone you came in contact with as a close contact was quarantined. When we move to high risk, we now have a situation where if you were sneezing and had a sore throat and maybe headachy, and those are some of the symptoms, you had to be treated as if you were positive, and anyone you came in contact with had to be treated as if you were positive until the quarantine time went away and your symptoms, or you could get a test. So that's a somewhat of a rubric that we've been following, and it changes with the risk level. Next slide, please. So what's our regional risk? On October 14th, we were notified that we moved from moderate risk to high risk. And of course, that kicked in the changes that we just talked about. High risk status required the contact tracing for anyone who is symptomatic, not just those who tested positive. And anyone in contact with the symptomatic individuals must also now be quarantined. The significance of that is it caused major dislocations in our staffing. So there were many days where we weren't sure if we could continue to keep the middle school open, Eisenhower. We weren't sure if on days that Hamilton could stay open. We had situations where we had to close programs within a school for special needs students because of the number of contact tracing people that had to be quarantined and sent home by us. And when I say that caused staffing dislocations, we had, our principals and our teachers have been running around trying to do 2 and 3 jobs in one day, depending on the roles of absences and who was quarantined, who was not only absent, but who may have been feeling perfectly healthy, but quarantined pursuant to the Department of Health guidelines. So over the since November 14th, and it just kept building and building all through September, we've been hanging on by our fingernails, barely being able to staff most of our schools. And in fact, if you look around our county, we're one of the few large districts, being the largest district, we're one of the few who are actually open. Bernards, Franklin, Montgomery, Hillsborough, South Plainfield, just to name but a few, are closed right now. Everybody has experienced similar problems. You cannot open schools and run schools without staff in them. So we've been hanging on thanks to the really hard work and dedication of our principals and our teachers who were coming to work knowing that they were not only going to do their job that day, they were going to step in and do the work of other people. So my point here is that this pandemic is something that has put tremendous stress on the structure of the system, particularly regarding staffing. Next slide, please. There were some questions, some very good questions about the dashboard. So the dashboard was created because people asked us. And the dashboard is basically modeled on the state reporting that is mandatory for us. So every day when we get a COVID test report, not a symptomatic test, but a COVID test report, we put in, we have to send that up to the county. And that county report looks exactly like the COVID dashboard that we have. And so the questions were, does the COVID dashboard tally on the district website include positive COVID tests for students who are all remote? And yes, it does, because they are enrolled in our school. So because they are enrolled in our school, the county has us report them as a COVID case from that school, even though they haven't crossed the threshold. The next question that follows logically from that is, does the district include all virtual students when making decisions to close in-person school? And the answer to that is absolutely not. So while we count positive test all virtual students in reporting to the state about the number of students enrolled in our schools who've tested positive, we do not consider them in our decisions to close a school or not, because they're not in the school. And I know there was some confusion about that, so we wanted to clear that up. Next slide. Another interesting question, why is it that 2 individuals who tested positive in a school could result in a closure for in-person instruction? And this is a very interesting question, and I'm learning from this, and it's one of the reasons we take our guidance from the Department of Health, because sometimes what may present to us as common sense may actually have a deeper implication for those people in the medical field. So the New Jersey Department of Health guidance states that we consult with the local health department officials to determine if any school, when these conditions exist. 2 cases that are identified within 14 days. Specifically zoning in here, these two cases, when they rise to the danger point in terms of closure, if they have no link to exposures outside the school setting, and we have no idea where they got their contact for COVID, and there's no clear connection that can easily be identified between the cases. So if they may not have any social links together, they're not together in any setting, they haven't come together or been in contact with some organization, some event, some party, some group of people who tested positive, so that the health official we could then identify the source came from here. So it rises to a level when you have two individuals and no one can make a connection between where that came from and how and who gave it, who they were in contact with that might have given them COVID. That becomes a situation where possibly the school is the source, because that's the only thing they have in common. So that is, again, guidance from the Department of Health. We didn't make that up. This is something that we meet with the county officials on. We identify what we have. They walk through it with us, the local and county officials. And when this triggers, that's what happened. And that's what happened both at the high school and the middle school. And it has not happened at the elementary schools yet. So the next question, which again, these are good questions, because you could see if you're not working with it, you would have reasonable wondering about. Next slide. So you have closed the high school for 2 cases, yet there have been 4 individuals testing positive at schools which were not closed. Why? So each positive case of COVID-19 is investigated during close contact tracing. The most common reasons schools have not been closed under these circumstances are the positive cases have been linked to an exposure outside of the school setting. So what has been typically happening is an individual person in the school community, ranging from staff to students, a vast majority have been have been testing positive, alerting us and saying, well, my husband, my wife, my mother, my older brother, or I went to a party and there was an X number of people at that party connected, tested positive. When that happens, there is a clear source of where the COVID spread is coming. Everyone identified with that area is isolated, and the guidance and the health officials feel confident that since you know where the source was, it was outside of school. If we isolate the person who tested positive, who contacted it outside of school, and then we reached inside the building and quarantined anyone who had a close contact with them over a period of time for 14 days, then the health officials and the guidance was comfortable that that was under control. And sometimes, back to that original listing of COVID on the dashboard, sometimes one might read that in a certain school there was a positive person, which is true, and that positive person might have actually been a virtual, all stay-at-home, all virtual learner who has not even crossed the threshold, so that would not be counted in any consideration to close schools. So again, I keep repeating, and I can't say it enough, we have been steeped in the guidelines. I think some of my staff have them memorized by now. And all cases, after we make a judgment, we run it by the local and county authorities, health officials, who it is their profession, who tell us, yes, or maybe you should have thought of it this way. And they help us through making our decisions, even though the final decision is made by me. So we just wanted to clear up a few obviously confusing aspects of how and why we are making decisions to close schools. Next slide, Andre. We're going to talk a little bit because we've had some questions about instruction, and we wanted to clear some of those up as well. Next slide. So this is an interesting question. I have read on social media that the district has absolutely no goal or planning going forward. Is that true? That was like a stab in the heart to the staff who've been killing themselves for the last couple of months, well, the whole year. So, you know, we went into hybrid instruction on October 12th. And on the week of October 16th, the administrative teams had initial discussions regarding the effectiveness of the hybrid instruction and schedules, and supervisory teams began to meet considering ways to increase instructional minutes. Now, I'd like to, what struck me, I didn't realize this until hindsight, the week of October 16th was the same week that we moved from moderate to high risk. So even though we moved from moderate to high risk, we took the position that we had to start planning for the someday when we could get it back together again and the pandemic starts to plateau. What we were not ready for in October 16th, and it didn't stop us continuing to plan, was that while we were planning for increasing instructional time, while we were planning for possible more in-person time, we were being hit with the new regulations on quarantining people who happened to be standing next to someone who sneezed and had a headache. And that was putting tremendous holes in our staffing, causing us to, as I said before, scramble. So that has been going on. At the end of November, through the first week of December, grade level teams convened to discuss student engagement, student attendance, pacing, instruction, and assessment. And all the teams included building administrators, supervisors, and staff.
Dr.
So-
Ficarra, do you mind
Sure.
if I interject just for a
Not
second
at
to
all.
provide a little context? So when we first made the decision, when we first designed the schedules for, you know, virtual and then for hybrid, some of the considerations that we had to be aware of is, you know, there are different things that happen at different levels that actually wind up impacting the way that you create a schedule. So like an example at the high school is that you also have to coordinate with VOTEC, who's on a different schedule than we are. Or if you look at our intermediate schools, we have teachers in 6th grade intermediate schools who are departmentalized. So they teach English language arts or math or social studies or science. But in 5th grade, they're not. So you teach, you know, English language arts or math, science, social studies. And so you actually almost have 2 different schools right there in an intermediate school. Also, the way that related arts is scheduled is different at every, you know, level. High school has electives. So all these things, we have shared teaching staff, wind up impacting the design of your schedule. And so when we started in the hybrid, you know, we wound up with different schedules. So the middle school and high school is similar in that they have like a, you know, 4-period day. And then the next day they have the additional 4 periods, right? An A-B schedule, it's called. Whereas in the intermediate school, we're running through all 8 periods in a day, or it's different at the primary school, again, for all the reasons that I mentioned. So when we went into hybrid, after providing the training and getting teachers, you know, to the best of our ability, come comfortable with teaching kids in 2 different settings, we really kind of needed to give it a month to see how it was working so that people could get used to the schedules. And while that was going on, we were anecdotally collecting information still from teachers, meeting with them, with departments. You know, we in central office meet with principals, with the supervisors, they're meeting with teachers. And, you know, as we began to get feedback from them, we made a decision that we needed to do something a little more formal that would involve pulling teachers in and collecting information, feedback from teachers to kind of look for patterns. And that's when we started to look towards the end of November at other things that we might be able to do to kind of test whether or not the schedules that we had implemented were working, what was effective, and what could be improved. So that was kind of the process during that first month of hybrid.
Okay, thank you, Karen. Feel free to jump in because this is your area of expertise and leadership. District planning in December. So we had grade level meetings, and the teams were directed to explore and consider changing the current schedules, increasing instructional time during virtual learning instruction, rethinking some aspects of scheduling, such as using the afternoon time differently, student wellness, pivoting to full-time virtual learning, challenges of the related arts, develop and finalize surveys that are actually going to be disseminated tomorrow. I did see something about no surveys, and this was obviously not prepared tonight. It's going out tomorrow.
And
Karen, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, just to also say that when they had these meetings, the way that they kind of measured how effective things were, where they looked at, you know, data, student attendance data, they compared it to, you know, this same time last year. They looked at the grades from the first marking period. In the high school, they actually looked at the last 3 years and the grades during the first marking period to look for trends. We looked at instructionally just where you are in a curriculum at this point, like which standards you would have hit, which units that you're currently in, because we also had to consider, you know, pacing, making changes, kind of adapting the curriculum. So they pulled all this information together in teams by grade level. And that's how they started to look at, like, you know, how successful are we right now, and going forward, what types of changes would we be able to make to increase in our focus has really been how can we increase instructional time, because we know that, you know, that would be our goal, but to balance that again with how are students doing, and to consider their wellness, social emotional wellness, just, you know, balancing, is it better to extend the day versus, you know, find other ways to make connections with students. So those were all the considerations that, you know, administrators were working on, you know, during this time period. Yes, and surveys are going out tomorrow. They were designed before break. They've been finalized, and they'll be going out to all teaching staff K-12 tomorrow.
Thank you. Next slide. So I think we did that slide.
Probably.
And then, so district planning, when there's a plateau in the number of COVID cases and the district moves from high risk back to the moderate risk, that's when we will begin looking at phasing in more in-person instruction. We have to have some plateau. We are right now leaning into an upward curve that shows, at least at this point, no sign of letting go. I'm optimistic for the future, but right now we're leaning into an upward curve. And again, I keep stressing the high risk has given us, has forced us to quarantine people, many of whom were not positive. And not only did they were they quarantined, but, you know, 7 or 8 people around them were quarantined. Next slide. And this question is why isn't there in-person instruction 5 days a week.
I think we might be on the wrong slide. Andres, maybe the next slide.
Yeah, Andres not on the right slide. Andres? There we go. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So why isn't there in-person instruction 5 days a week? It's simply not possible to handle, to house all the students in school at the same time. It can be explained mathematically. The DHO guidance calls for 6 feet social distancing between students in a class. That means you take a desk and we put blue tape around the floor and we measure 6 feet from that desk to another desk. And when we complete that task, in most of our elementary schools, we get 10. Some of the intermediates, we get 11. And the high school, we get around 10, and sometimes less. Well, when you formally have a classroom, a school district built on 20 to 25, where would we double the amount of classrooms to have everybody come into school 5 days a week? We would literally have to rebuild the school, the same number of classrooms as we have. So we can't do that at the time. We have to be in hybrid as long as there's 6 foot distancing. The next slide. And this is interesting because we don't want people to think that we are sleeping at the switch either. So when I look at my classes, at the classes my children are in, there seems to be plenty of room for more students. Why not eliminate the K-8 AB schedule and the high school ABC schedule and combine classes and have 5 days a week instructional program? So that is something that comes up in conversations with us all the time, and we're monitoring it. However, once again, the district is moved from moderate to high risk, and we barely have the staff to cover what we have now, and we're hanging on by a thread. But it is something that we're looking at, and we're considering, but we want to see those numbers drop a little bit. We're not in a position to say, in a time of rising COVID, I saw a figure today, 25 new cases today in Bridgewater. In a time of rising COVID and massive quarantines of staff due to the new instructional the new guidelines for high risk, it's just not a time that we're ready to do that. We're anxious to do it. We want to do it. But we have to have the staff in the buildings to do it. And we keep quarantining them and sending them home because that's what the guidance says we have to do. Also, while you look at the York students' classroom, there are other classrooms which, while there are classes that could look as if they could be combined, we're stuck with the fact that there are other classes that are at capacity, and we can't combine cohorts safely. So we are looking at this, we're considering this, but again, I can't stress enough the staffing problems that we have to start to implement now in what seems to be an ever increasing number of quarantines and positive cases. Next slide. Is the district seeking ways to increase in-person instruction for our most needy population? Dan, Sylvia has been very much on this, and we are continuing to examine various locations for the possibility to maximize instruction, learning for our most needy students, particularly those that have been impacted by individual school closings that have been greater than others. So we are looking at that, we're examining that, and we're trying to see if we can find alternate space for those children. Next slide. What has been done to improve virtual instruction? Karen, you can jump in at any time on this.
Do you want to just jump in now?
Sure, go ahead.
So I really think the question should be, what has the district done to improve virtual and hybrid instruction? Because I think we've been really working at both. So as you know, in the beginning of the year, we provided professional development related to all different technology platforms and just best practices, as much as we know these best practices for teaching virtually. Leading into the hybrid model, up through October 12th, we provided training for teachers in how to actually teach in a hybrid model. Again, some of that involved using technology to be able to teach the kids at home while you were teaching the kids in front of you. And some of it is also just, how to create an environment where you're having kids and either, model feeling that they can participate and how to increase, engagement. So that was training leading into October 12th. Since that time, we've just continued. We have ongoing professional development. We are very lucky to have a supervisor of professional practice, Anne-Marie Mattia, and a supervisor, Jamie Kochis, of instructional technology, and they have just continued to do, we call it pop-up PD here, but we have ongoing professional development offered, throughout the week to support teachers who are at different points still in how comfortable they are in teaching in this model. And even as we continue to use new technology platforms, as you become more comfortable with what you're already using, then you're ready to kind of expand out. So some of this is repeating stuff so that we kind of continue to offer it when people are ready for it. As you also know, there was a point, at one of our board meetings earlier in the year where we did approve quite a few technology platforms that we hope make instruction, I don't want to say easier, but even easier, more meaningful. We continue to have discussions about meaningful instruction and assessment. So some of our professional development is teacher choice and ongoing. Some of it is department meetings, faculty meetings, where we can talk more about specific subject or content areas. Some of it is pacing. We need to look at pacing of instruction, how to adapt instruction, rethinking how it is that we assess when we're using technology platforms to do assessments. So that's all been ongoing. Most recently, we did get an app for, it's Go Guardian Teacher, and that information went home to parents of students in 5th through 8th grade, because remember, in 5th through 8th grade, even prior to any of this happening, we were in a one-to-one initiative. So we have provided all of those students, they have district Chromebooks, and Go Guardian really allows the teacher to be able to see on the student's screen so that they're able to give them more meaningful and timely feedback. And so that actually has all been posted on our district website under the parent tab for virtual learning. So there's a different additional information about that right now you can look at on the website. One more thing I wanted to say, just to go back to the earlier point, so teachers are aware of this, but as we're convening committees and looking at how we're scheduling and looking at the afternoon time and different ways of using virtual learning time, at some levels, teachers were pulled into the committees right from the beginning and helped to actually create the surveys that are going out tomorrow. And in some cases, the surveys are going out, and once that information is collected, we're actually working with the association to have teacher representatives join the committee to look at recommendations. So if teachers are listening right now, they should know if they haven't been asked yet to be on the committee, there will be teachers on committees at all levels. So.
Okay, thank you, Karen. And I think that was the last slide. So the purpose was that I think there were some very good questions that the community had that needed to be answered. And I also think that there was a lot of misunderstanding, and hopefully we cleared some of that up. We will be putting out a letter sometime tomorrow on school messenger, so that people who didn't take the time to watch this at the board meeting can get the same information. And we will also be posting this on the website and continually updating as the time goes by. In terms of surveying parents, the other thing I wanted to put out was many of the surveys that we were inundating people with, we needed to know who was going to ride the bus, right? That was a big deal. Like, how do we know who's going to ride the bus and who isn't going to ride the bus? And what would those bus routes look like? We needed to know who was going to be hybrid and who was not going to be hybrid. We needed to know who was going to come back from at a period of time, a certain period of time, come back from hybrid and go into or go back from all virtual and go into hybrid. And right now we have a situation where we are in a hybrid. We are looking and planning to move out of the current situation as quickly as we can, but depending on fitting in with the health guidance. And as well as fitting in with the health guidance, the important part is that the health guidance is imposing upon us, and I think rightly so, because our schools have not been spreading COVID. So we've been on it. I mean, to track down 451 people and isolate them was not just done, with a sleight of hand. So it's been working. As soon as we can move to more instructional time, having staff, and more instructional time, having a plateau or a reduction from going down from high risk to moderate risk, and then relaxing the rules. Those are the benchmarks we're looking at. We are as anxious to get back to in-person learning as anyone is. This is something that was thrust on the educational community. I in no way pretend that in-person or virtual and hybrid instruction is a substitute for in-person instruction. But at the same time, we have to follow the health regulations that are given to us by the appropriate authorities and not make up decisions or get involved in the popular politics or the popular opinions that are floating around. We cling to the guidance and the health officials, and that's how we make our decisions. Thank you, and I hope that has answered some questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vaquera and Ms. Jones. Do any of the board members have any additional questions for either of them? Mr. Singer?
Yeah, I have one point of clarification and then one question. I just want to clarify the surveys that we're discussing, those are for staff that are coming out tomorrow, right?
Yes.
Yes.
When does the third marking period begin?
February.
February.
I think it's the second, right at the beginning of February. That could be a day off.
So we have one regular meeting scheduled between now and then, and a special meeting as well. Can we expect some updates to come during those meetings, I assume?
Related to recommendations that we might have for.
Yeah, any further recommendations, whether or not it's hybrid, remote, or expansion.
Yes.
Great, thanks.
And I guess I just want to weigh in here. I think Dr. Vaquera and Ms. Jones at all of the board meetings have been providing updates in terms of where we stand and what's going on.
And I certainly wouldn't suggest otherwise.
I'm sorry.
I certainly wasn't suggesting otherwise.
I wasn't saying you were. I just want the public to know that, if they're looking for information, this is a good venue to come to. And it's much better to hear it here than on social media.
I have a question.
Sure.
Just for clarification, if I remember correctly, we had, the past survey, beginning of the school year, we had a number of students or families who decided to stay with the hybrid schedule, right? And then later, for whatever reason, decided to keep their students home because they had that option. Is that true? And because that's why I think the numbers may be skewed, that initially we had probably planned for 10 or 12 in a classroom. And then at the end of the day, when people started to keep their kids home, then we ended up with 4 or 5, giving a false impression that, hey, look, the classroom is empty. So am I correct? Like, you can only plan on what
Yes,
people give you, right?
We've had some, sometimes the enrollments leaving temporarily for a couple of weeks. So around the holidays, we've had some groups, not as a group, but numbers in a school choose hybrid right before the holiday. I don't know whether they were self-isolating for going to grandma's house, and occasionally we've noticed as there was spikes and the news started talking about large spikes, we would lose some people. And then in the beginning, there were people who said they were going hybrid, who then decided, let's go back. A lot of it, what we've noticed is a lot of it is depending upon the news cycle, and which is related to where the COVID numbers are going. When they're rising, we're losing people, and when they're plateauing, I think people are going to come back.
Yep,
So,
and also, yeah, go ahead.
So one of the dilemmas that we're trying to figure out is once it becomes obvious to all, which is why we're planning now, at some point in time, I'm hoping that if everything goes right and the weather gets warm and the vaccine kicks in and we start to plateau and move down the ladder from high risk to moderate risk, and staffing becomes less of a problem, and we start to move towards increasing in-person time, then we have to figure out a way of asking people to commit, because unlike any other time, if there are 10 seats in that classroom and the 11th child is in that grade, you can't put the 11th seat in there. And that's a constraint that we've never had before. So it used to be, well, squeeze them in. If you have a couple of tight classrooms, we'll figure it out. But now we have a fixed number of 11 or 10, and to put an extra class in is to violate the guidance. So that is something that's like puts a shackle on us.
And secondly, what about extending the day? Instead of having 4.5 hours, could we extend it to another hour and a half or 2? Are you looking at that as well? Or
Karen and her people are looking at that.
Right.
Right.
That's part of what they're looking at across the committees is ways that we would be able to use additional time, even if it's through virtual instruction in the afternoon. And that could look all different ways. Like, for one example, just at a primary level, you could do small group targeted instruction. At a secondary level, you might be able to rotate through additional courses. So, there's all different things that you could potentially do to increase instructional time. And those are all the things that we're looking at.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Gladstone?
Thank you. I was reading about the vaccine, the COVID-19 vaccine phase 1A, 1B, et cetera. And in New Jersey, teachers fall under the 1B category, which is, coming up soon, I hope. So I just wanted to know if it's also support staff too. I was just reading in the NJ.com article. Is it your intention, will the administration, I know we can't force anybody, it's all private, by choice, but would you put out any type of communication to encourage all of our staff members get vaccinated as soon as possible, since it's
the process that's going on, we're sort of kept in the dark and then given questions. Our position is we want to cooperate as fully as possible. In fact, our nurses were vaccinated today. I imagine they're not sharing the plans like this is what's going to happen A, B, C, I'm assuming vaccinating nurses is a way of setting us up for them to be able to vaccinate staff. We've signed up to be a vaccination center for our staff. And in
Great.
fact, we signed off today. They want tons of information. They want to even know the type of refrigerator and the make of refrigerator. But we've been pushing forward, and we're in the line, and we're as soon as it comes, we're going to be ready to be a vaccination center. And I must say, for our staff. Right?
Thank
They're not looking at us to vaccinate the community, but
Right.
they are looking at us to vaccinate our staff.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Walker?
Yeah, I said to help some answer some questions. This has been a really informative this evening, both for the board and the community. I'm like, if the community does have questions, where should they direct those? So, social media is not going to be the answer. To the staff in the district, where should they direct those questions? To you, to the building principals? We probably, let's clarify that.
That's a good question, Barry. And so from, in any organizational structure, when you're dealing with over 8,000 students, 8,600 students, I don't know how many parents that projects out to. And then employees, you're literally talking about thousands of people. And my office is not equipped to read and answer, particularly when hot button issues come up, 50, 60 emails a day. We won't be able to do anything else. But many times we find that people are skipping over their principals, who we meet with weekly, share all our information, take any questions, any kind of, that's how we in the central office know what's going on in the schools, is through the principals. So the principals should be the first place where our staff members go, or our community members go, before they send off an email. And I've always said, and I commit to it, if you talked, if as a parent, you asked a question of your teacher and you couldn't get it, and you asked a question of the principal and you couldn't get it, and you went up the line to the assistant superintendent and you couldn't get it, call my office and tell me, because I want to know. But to skip over everybody and have, one person or the board member asking board members questions directly distorts the organizational chart. That's why there is one. It's a pyramid of control, and it's designed to have fewer and fewer contacts at the lower levels. Principal will have 500 parents. I'll have 500 students. I'll have 8,600 students. So
can I just add that as you go up through the levels, if it's specific to like a curriculum issue or or instruction, sometimes it's the departmental supervisor, and if you contact a principal, they would be able to redirect you to that person too, because I get a lot of good information from the supervisors, who we also meet with regularly. So
yeah, and I saw something today. Someone sent me something where there was some online communication, some Facebook or something communication, where someone was making a declarative statement about something, and another parent said, no, the principal said that at the last meeting. So I encourage people to go to your PTA meetings. And I meet with the PTA once a month, the executive board and the PTA members. And so there's a built-in manner in which people should be asking their PTA presidents, who will then filter those questions into the PTA executive board and directly to me.
Thank you. I just think it's good to clarify that. And I mean, and also if it's, I guess if it's a student oriented, they ask their teacher, start with the teacher too, right? They have a question
Exactly.
about the student, they go directly to the teacher. And as it grows there, they can guide there too. So, I mean, they also, thank you.
Any other questions? Ms. Levitt?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Ficara and Ms. Jones. That did clear up a lot of questions I think have been floating around. In regards to the attendance at classes and understanding that we need to come out of the high risk down to the moderate before we can revisit combining or extending. I know, Ms. Jones, you said, you were using that data of who is actually attending versus just who signed up for hybrid to inform your feedback. Is that something that's at all available to us?
So what they were looking at, actually, the groups, they weren't looking at that. I hear what you're saying. It was kind of the same point that AJ was making before, that in the beginning, probably back in August, when we were trying to see if we can assign virtual teachers and we were struggling to try to make that work at first, we were at about 47% of overall families had chosen all virtual at that point. And we've crept up over 50%. But also keep in mind that even from the beginning, this has never been you can't almost look at it that way because it's not consistent across the schools. You could have one school that was very high at, virtual, and another school that was very high with the in-person.
And I'm actually interested in the differences of that,
Yeah.
the schools, but also the grade levels.
Right. So it was
understanding at the high school is a lot less attendance.
So, I mean, we could probably get our hands on that. And that's part of what impacted our ability to kind of figure out how we were going to do, whether we were going to assign all virtual teachers or not in the beginning, was based on that. And it was difficult across 7 schools, especially in the primaries and all the grade levels, to make those things work because they were not even.
Right.
But that's not what they've been looking at in the committees. What they've been looking at in the committees, and this was really I would say mostly at the middle school, high school level, was the actual student attendance. So when you have students who are either all virtual or you have students who are in the hybrid and they're on the day when they're virtual, are the students showing up to class?
I see.
And they wanted to be able to compare that, with last year and the previous year, and then compare kind of how students were actually doing on their assessments, how they did on the marking period grades, to kind of look at the impact of the scheduling and this model and the environment on how we're achieving. But we've had long conversations about that because sometimes you can identify it because you see a student struggling because of the grade or because they're not showing up. But there also are students who are showing up and you can't tell from their grades, and they might still, be struggling. Or even if a student isn't struggling at all right now, academically or emotionally, you're still looking at, well, this is the curriculum that we're going to be able to, I don't want to use the word cover, but I'm going to, the curriculum that we're going to address throughout the year, right? And so what happens to that student next year or the year after? And we have to consider all of those things, right? That we're hitting all the standards. And so that's why we're kind of looking at what are some other ways that we can increase instructional time. But we weren't really looking at where we were with a hybrid cohort,
So my question is, going forward, when we do start to get to the end of the marking period and have to determine, what the form is going to be, if we survey the could we maybe get more information on why they are choosing virtual or hybrid? So that if we have families that are like, well, if there was more than 2 kids in my class, my kid would go, but because I understand it's all fluxing. And
so that's interesting that you asked that, because we actually had that conversation this morning as administrators, because we were wondering if once we get the feedback from teachers and convene meetings next week and kind of follow up on that, if one of the recommendations that might come out of this is that we do need more information, and would everybody be in support of extending the time in the afternoons virtually? That might look different in K4, and parents might feel differently about that than parents would feel, in 9-12. So yeah, that is something that we're considering.
And then my other question, and I apologize if I'm rehashing old things, but I would like clarity on notifications and like who, you said we contact you. This is really for you, Dr. Ficara. Your contact tracing and the people that I understand who the positive cases versus symptomatic cases determine who's quarantining, but my understanding is that close contact is 15 minutes or more, 6 feet, like less than 6 feet away. So does that implication to me as a parent is if my kid is in school and another student is in their class, but they're following the guidelines and wearing their masks and sitting more than 6 feet apart, that I would not be notified that a teacher or a child in their class was positive. But I'm unclear if that's true or not. If I would.
Well, so the rule of thumb here is that starting with privacy.
Yeah.
If we determined through and principals and central office people have been doing extensive interviews on each and every one of these cases to determine if somebody was near someone for 15 minutes at a time within 6 feet, and it's no longer just 15 minutes in one, it's cumulative. And that came up with teachers who may be going back and forth to the same child. And so while I was never there for 15 minutes, I was there 6 times for 3 minutes. So I was there more. So we're looking at if we do a thorough job of this, if we determine that your child was not in close contact and therefore not in danger, we're not going to tell you who it was in that room. And that's to protect the people who may be positive, or the positive contact. First of all, we're not supposed to be telling their medical information, but people, particularly at the elementary levels, can very quickly put 2 and 2 together if we say teacher, and we know that somebody who was in that room was quarantined. So if we say individual, and there's been some frustration where people were actually angry that I got emails where I don't know if it was the teacher across the hall from me or not. And actually that's like a pat on our back, because you're not supposed to know. If you were in contact with them, and because we've interviewed them and interviewed people who were close contacts, then we would not only just like quarantine you, you would get a personal contact and be told this is, you are quarantined for the following reasons.
Okay, so I don't necessarily have any problem with that, but so what you're saying is it's much more individualized. It isn't automatic. Like if your kid was in class with someone that's positive, you'll get it's only if you research and find out that they had close contact.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions for Dr. Ficara or Ms. Jones? I just want to make sure that I understand something. So the people that have brought up concerns that, let's say there's 5 kids in the class, so why can't I combine? I'm assuming we have 10 or 11 kids slated to almost every class, but if someone doesn't show up, we still need to hold that seat for them because they may come tomorrow or the next day. Is that correct?
That's correct. And we've been getting spotty attendance based on the season, around Thanksgiving, around Halloween, around the holiday, the winter break. So we're getting this spotty attendance.
Okay. And so, because since I know that's come up, there really isn't a way to work around that because that spot has to be held for that child that has requested the hybrid instruction.
And one of the things that, if these numbers hold, I think we can eventually get to combining cohorts with a lot of planning and thought, but not in an environment where I can hardly staff the schools.
Understood. Okay, thank you very much. And I just want to, publicly state that I think we're in the best hands with you, Dr. Fakera, and you, Ms. Jones. I know you guys are working endlessly to make this happen and to do what's in the best interest of our children. And so I just want to thank you both very, very much, as well as the staff. I know there are a lot of people behind the scenes that are working very hard.
And we have to give kudos to Dan Sylvia, who has been, I nicknamed him Dan COVID, because every time my phone rings at night, I go, oh no, here's another one. And it's been Saturdays, Sundays, early mornings, whenever anybody in the district, it goes to Dan, and then we start on the investigative route. So it's been hectic, and we have to give him credit.
Absolutely. I hope you'll pass along our thanks to him as well. So next, we're going to go into public comment in just a second. But before we do that, I think it's best to bring up committees. We do need to get the committees off the ground as soon as possible. And last year, we kept the committees the same so that we had some stability. But this year, I think it's time to switch things up again. And I would like people to let me know their top 2 committee choices by the end of day tomorrow. I don't want to give a lot of time because we really need to get the committees moving forward. So if you can tell me your top 2 choices, I will try my best to make sure you get at least one of them, but unlikely you'll get both. But if you could just email me by the end of the day tomorrow, I'd appreciate it. And if anyone,
Jackie, I just have a quick question.
Committees there are, in fact, let me just, we've got the legislative, which I don't think really was that active last year, but we've got that. We have FFT, we have academic, we have personnel, we have Hib, we have community relations, negotiations. We won't talk about it this time. And the other one that I do want to throw in there is the school start times. I know we had talked about starting to plan, and I'm talking planning only. I know we've got a lot of work to do with getting everything up and going with COVID and improving, the amount of instructional time. I know we have a lot of activities there, but I still think we need to start the planning for the other. We did have committee members, but given at least one committee member has left, we've got new board members coming on. I'm going to open it up to whoever is interested. Again, email me if there's an interest, and we'll go from there. Did I forget anything? Did I miss any committees? Jill?
You didn't miss a committee, but I just want to point out the Hib Committee is generally like a Zoom or phone call or Google Meetup with superintendent on Friday mornings. I don't know if that's going to stay that way. So
it's typically like 8:30 in the morning, and it would be the Friday before the regular board meetings.
Yep. Just want
to
make sure everybody knew that.
Feel free. Thank you. And feel free, if you have questions, you can call me, and I'm sure any of the other board members would be happy to answer for the newer board members. And actually, that brings me up the other item I wanted to bring up. We need to get mentors for our new board members as part of our action plans. So if anyone is interested in being a mentor, could you please email me that as well by the end of the day tomorrow also. And one other item, I had sent out the draft action plans. So we had the retreat where we had the board goals. We had discussion around what the action plan should look like. I re-listened to that whole tape, and I did my best to try to capture it in the action plan. I sent out a draft to everyone. So if anyone has any corrections or, any feedback, please let me know, and we can get that updated and hopefully posted on the share drive, or as well as for the community, so that everyone can see what our plans are. And I did get that to the 2 new board members. Jessica, I had trouble finding your board email.
It's just started yesterday, but it's J Levitt.
Okay, I don't know why it wasn't coming up, so I'll have to try it again. But I sent it to your home email, which I really don't like to do, but I did do that. So that was it. Before we go to open public comment, anyone else have anything we need to discuss? Okay. I just want to mention with the open public comment, because we've gotten some feedback on this as well, that it's not meant to be a back and forth discussion. It's really meant to be an opportunity for the public to share whatever their concerns are. The board listens, the administration listens. We take that feedback, we assimilate it, we, really do listen and digest the information, but it's not intended to be a forum where we're giving answers at the meeting, but it's an opportunity to share what you're thinking. And I'm actually going to read something from our website just so that people are aware. The Board of Education takes into consideration comments made by the public at meetings and hearings. Questions, concerns, and requests directed to the board will usually be deferred pending administrative and board consideration. So just so that people don't feel we're ignoring them, we definitely hear it. When you send us an email, we're reading them. We're definitely welcoming to getting that feedback, but just so you're aware of what is taking place. Anyone from the board need to add anything to that? Okay, so we're now up to the second opportunity for public comment. Individuals and/or groups are invited to present their concerns, comments, and requests to the Board of Education at this time for any matters. In accordance with board policy, members of the public are allotted this opportunity to address the board for a maximum of 3 minutes and a total of 30 minutes for the whole public comment during this period of the meeting. As this meeting is being conducted remotely as a virtual meeting, public comments can be made via the following options. 1, completing the form online, which will be read at the appropriate point in the meeting. 2, leave a voicemail at 908-725-3976. Or 3, email or letter received by the board secretary prior to 6 p.m. indicating the person's desire for the email to be read as public comment. And I see that Mr. Stars is already sharing the public comments.
So we do not have any voicemails, and I will go ahead and begin reading these for those that might be listening on the phone. First is from Rachel Wesco, 510 Vicky Drive. She comments, the current virtual model is entirely synchronous for the half of the day. The teachers are not able to differentiate to their different students' needs in this model. There are too many students and not enough time. If we extend to a full day while providing students with longer breaks and less synchronous time, the teachers will be able to better meet their students' needs. I believe we can look to other districts like Basking Ridge to better understand how they made their virtual model effective. If we start the day with the morning meeting entirely synchronous, teachers could then work with students in small synchronous groups while others did asynchronous specials or material provided by their teacher. Most elementary school teachers provide instruction in small groups rather than direct instruction to the entire class. I do not want to see my son on the computer for a longer period of time, but I do want to see him more engaged in the time he is on the computer. Could the district please consider modifying this model? Next comment is from Scott Mahalik, 367 Rolling Knolls Way, Bridgewater. Happy New Year to the board and administration, and congratulations to Barry, Jessica, Jean, and Lucy on being sworn in as Board of Education members. Best of luck to the 4 of you, as well as the other 5 board members as you navigate what will surely be another tricky and unprecedented year. I encourage the board and administration to continue to flex as necessary to deal with the impact of COVID. We are all aware of petitions circulating which are urging for different solutions. However, it would be irresponsible for the district to have specific plans and timelines for a full reopening scenario at this time when we're in the midst of a spike in cases and there are still so many unknowns regarding the timing of vaccinations. Additionally, the idea of now starting to mix cohorts, increase capacity in the buildings, and administer lunches a definitively non-mass activity does not seem to be in our students' or staff's best interest at this point in time. It is imperative to continue to offer a full virtual option at least through the end of this school year. It is equally imperative to not switch students, classes, teachers, causing even more disruption in order to deal with schedule changes. Continuing to operate with separate cohorts, while not ideal or perfect, remains our best solution for the time being. Our current setup is not ideal. We all want our children to be back at school full time and for full days, but not at the expense of their and their teachers' health and safety. We are still in the throes of this pandemic. Now is not the time to be increasing the risk of exposures. Next is from Sonia Chartowich, 10 Deer Run. Hi, I found this in the board policies regarding their restart and recovery plan. The New Jersey DOE required school districts in the state to develop in collaboration with community stakeholders a restart and recovery plan to reopen schools that best fits the district's local needs. Are we, the parents, teachers, and taxpayers, our community stakeholders? Please collaborate with us. If we are not, then who is? Who are you collaborating with? We are here to express our local needs, which currently are not being met. See this petition where many in the community have collectively gathered to voice a similar interest in having more communication and planning. The petition clearly states that the community is demanding a plan of action from the Board of Ed and that they be held to the same principles set for the teachers to evaluate the effectiveness. One of those principles is reflection. Teachers are regularly asked, what can they do better? What can we do better for our students? Has a district reflected on the last 4 months of hybrid instruction to see what can be done better? If so, how did they come to those conclusions without the input from parents and teachers? Regarding the response in the paper today to the petition, Laura Kress mentioned the district has begun formulating committees and beginning to investigate new ideas and changes. Why is this just beginning now, halfway through the school year? Additionally, it was stated that very soon that they will be bringing in teachers and staff to continue discussions. Again, why have the teachers and staff not already been included? She, Kress, asked for meaningful suggestions and ideas. However, wouldn't those on the front line, teachers and staff, be the best to provide those? When will you be eliciting information from parents and teachers via surveys so we can gather more information to help with planning and decision making? Looking at the BRSD motto of teaching them one and all, inspire, engage, educate, improve the world, and make it great. This current model is not inspiring nor engaging. It is not improving anything. The model may be challenging them to grow, but in a way that is beyond their capacity, at least for my primary school age kids, which then creates frustration and extinguishes their desire to learn and grow. Virtually, they are bored and unengaged. I understand there are still a lot of things that need to be figured out to get us back to where we should be, but my hope is that the students' education is a top priority. The Board of Ed representative at one point stressed guaranteeing safety, which seems like that is the priority. Unfortunately, no one can ever guarantee someone else's safety. We should create a safer environment, which has always been done, and then allow those who feel unsafe due to health issues, etc., the option to stay home. While safety is definitely a priority, effective education should be the top priority of the district's education system. In a district such as ours, a very intelligent district with the ability to think outside the box, I'm sure collaboration with the community stakeholders, parent, teachers, taxpayers would demonstrate that we have many who are willing to share and may have already shared meaningful suggestions and ideas to assist in a plan to move forward to help meet the local needs of our children's education. I would hope that this would be the most immediate action taken from this, to begin surveying the committee once again to gather necessary data for the road to reopening. Next is from Ramla Tayabakan, 41 Totten Drive. Comment, what is the next step in the schools moving ahead for more instructional in-person opportunity? What are the future plans on the table? What is the criteria for those plans to go into effect? Why is the virtual learning a half day? Next is from Laura Kress, BRA President, 28 South Cadillac Drive. I would like to extend congratulations to the new board members as well as to Jackie and Barry in their roles as President and Vice President. I am hopeful the association and the board are able to continue working together for the mutual benefit of all students and staff. Next is from Howard Teichman, 60 Fairmont Ave. I would like to congratulate Mr. Walker, Ms. Levitt, Ms. Lee, and Ms. Saylor on your election to the board, and also congratulate Jackie Barlow and Barry Walker on your selection as officers of the board for the coming year. I wish the board well as it deals with the especially challenging issues that confront the district at the present time, as well as a very important task of selecting a permanent superintendent of schools. We can only hope that a greater sense of normalcy will prevail when the board meets to reorganize next January. Next comment is from Tricia Casamento, 609 Strawbridge Street. Have you considered reopening the K-4 schools, as there are little or no cases for that age group and those children do not do well with virtual learning, or even starting smaller and opening K2? Next is from Laura Kress, BREA president. I would like to thank Dr. Fakir and the administration for recognizing how hard our staff is working under the COVID guidelines and quarantining rules. I would also like to thank our building and ground staff for keeping the buildings as safe as possible for all of us to use. Next is from Rachel Wesco, 510 Vicky Drive. In the road back plan for education, it states communication, clear and consistent communications with stakeholders are vital to successful implementation. Establish a single point of contact for information and ensure that it is regularly maintained with outdated information removed to ensure that messaging remains clear to all stakeholders. Recognizing that flexibilities in implementation come with the unique challenges, craft a strong communications plan to share strategies and rationale with parents and other members of the local education community. How might the district improve its communication with families moving forward? Next is from Tricia Casamento, 609 Strawbridge Street. If there's only enough space for 10 to 11 students, why not ask which students want to be all virtual until the end of the year? And if half of class chooses virtual, there may not be a space issue. Next comment is from Denise Shaughnessy, 1 Bradley Lane. Why do so many student staff need to quarantine as close contacts if social distancing is supposed to be happening in the schools? Also, since many of the elementary and intermediate schools are not closing at the same frequency as the upper level grades, why not consider increasing the number of days that younger students can attend, especially for those who have interventions, accommodations, or maximal support needs in place? Next is from Lauren Madison. Bridgewater, has there been any thought to allow the younger kids with an IEP who need that in-person time to attend another current empty cohort in their same school, especially since elementary schools have not had to close? The teachers are already in the school teaching at the time, so this wouldn't be a staffing issue. Next is from Courtenay Higgins, 12 Waldron Drive. Is there a written reopening plan in place for parents to see that outlines the stages and details of returning to in-person learning based on county health criteria? I know some other districts have shared plans like these with parents. If there is a site where it is posted, would appreciate the link. Thank you. Next is from Rachel Wesco, 510 Vicky Drive. It is my understanding from listening to the meeting that the surveys developed were for teachers. When might parents expect to be surveyed? Next is from Emil Roskowitz, 782 Amsterdam Road. Will the staff survey results be made public, and when will the parent survey be sent out? Next is from Tara Meza Salma, 4444 Staple Chase Lane. When will you be surveying parents? They have been the boots on the ground with virtual instruction. Wouldn't it help shed light on A, how instruction is going behind the scenes, and B, where parents stand in sending their children, in which you would give you a much better understanding of number of in-person students, the number of virtual versus in-person are stale? Emil Roskowitz, 782 Amsterdam Road. Aren't Branchburg, Basking Ridge, and Warren also in high risk level? How is it their elementary schools are managing 5 days of instruction a week and their staff levels are manageable? Have you consulted with them? And last but not least, Denise Shaughnessy, 1 Brady Lane. Why are 2 unrelated cases used as a number to cause a shift to full virtual in such a large school district while the same number is used for smaller districts? And that concludes the public comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stars. And a couple of things. I do want to go into closed session very briefly, 5 to 10 minutes. But before we do that, I just want to mention the upcoming meetings. January 19th, we have another regular meeting. January 28th, we have a special session with the New Jersey school boards, as we discussed earlier. And February 9th, another regular meeting. And in terms of the closed session, there will be no action taken afterwards, just so that people are aware. Whereas discussion by the board is required on matters that are exceptions to the requirement that a public body hold its meeting in public, and whereas the topics for discussion are personnel, interim superintendent, whereas it is expected that the details of the discussion may be made public as soon as the issues may be acted upon publicly. Be it resolved that the board enter into closed session at this time.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Okay, so we will now go into closed session and just want to wish the public a good evening and good health. Take care.